When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Let's stand.
It gives me the greatest privilege to welcome you into our assembly this morning to worship with us in spirit and in truth. Today we're going to talk about trust, coming from the 5th Psalm, verses 11 and 12. Psalms 11 and 12. I'm going to read from the King James and from the ESV in order to get the word in that we are interested in. From the ESV it says, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them sing song for joy and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you." From the King James it reads, "But let all those who put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy, because thou defendest them. Let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee." As we look at this first verse 11, there are some thoughts I want us to get so that we may really glean some good thoughts from this lesson. Where is David when he writes this great psalm? Why does he use the word trust and refuge? Doesn't it give you the idea that maybe something is happening in his life? Maybe someone is chasing him, just maybe, and then he has to revert back to the one who has been there for him and with him in his past days. All those who put their trust in thee, them also love thy name. Now, we want to isolate 3 clauses from this text, because if taken in their sequence, they are very significant of the true path by which man draw nigh to God and become righteous. They are all 3 designations of the same people, but regarded under different aspects at different stages. There is a distinct order in them, whether the psalmist was fully conscious of it or not. He was anticipating and stating with wonderful distinctiveness the Christian sequence: faith, love, righteousness. Think of those words, because we're going to deal with them today. He says, "They that put their trust in thee, them also that love thy name." Now, look with me a moment. The first thought here is that the foundation is one of trust. The foundation is one of trust. Now, the word that is employed here is very significant. It is, in its literal force, it really means to run for refuge. And that the literal signification has not altogether been lost in the spiritual and metaphorical use of it as a term expressive of religious experience. In other words, This was what David was accustomed to. As he fought each battle, as he go through each trial, he was forced to put his trust in God. He could not depend upon man. Look back at his beginning as he comes in contact with Goliath and with King Saul. You remember? Saul tried to take his armor to fit on David, but it just would not work. He would remind Saul and others, look, when I was in trouble fighting with lions and so forth, it was God, my trust. It was God in whom I trust. He is the one who delivered me. It is not weapons of warfare, but his faith in God. He would say, be merciful unto me, O God, be merciful to me, for my soul thirsteth in thee, or trusteth in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I take refuge. There the picture that is in the words is distinctly before the psalmist's mind, and he is thinking not only of the act of mind and heart by which he cast himself in confidence upon God, but upon that which represents in symbol the act by which a man flees to some hiding place. Now, the psalmist said that this is what happened to David. And it was written when he was in a cave. And we could understand that. In imagination, we can see the rough sides of the cavern that sheltered him, arching over the fugitive. He is in that cave, and then we see all those rocks that's covering him like the wings of some great bird. And just as he has fled with eager feet and is safely hidden from his pursuers, so he has betaken himself in the everlasting rock, in the cleft of which he is at rest and secure. Now, we use this word trust this morning because sometimes it seems like a common word. We are always thinking of trust. I don't trust this, I don't trust that. And sometimes, listen, we get into a relationship for the wrong reason by talking about trust. If our trust is not in God, we are going to be disappointed. For no man or woman is worth the kind of trust that we put in them that belongs to God. But on the other hand, when we trust God, when we put our trust in God, you will notice that it doesn't matter what happens around me. My trust is in God. He is my refuge. He is my hiding place. If you don't mind. So to trust in God is neither more or less than to flee to him for refuge and there to be at peace. So when we think of David in the psalm, let's go back and look at some words this morning. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Notice now, David is a child of God. Therefore, the first interpretation is to the child of God. Take refuge in God. Let them ever sing for joy and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exalt in you. Just look back to the third psalm. Let me show you what I mean. The third psalm. He would say, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. But thou, O Lord, are the shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of my head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Then look at verse 5 now. You want to see what trust is? Remember, he is in a cave. He's surrounded by his enemies. There's no way out. What is he supposed to do? He says in verse 5, I laid me down and slept. I awake, for the Lord sustained me. You hear that? In other words, it says, I don't care who is at the cave's door. I don't care what weapons he has in his hand. When I lay down to sleep, it is God who keeps me. It is God who sustains me. When I wake up this morning, I thank my God for keeping me safe through the night. Look at verse 6. I would not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Oh, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone, that thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Now, he is talking about as if it has already happened. And it may not be, but his trust in God for the future shows that what will happen is already happening in his mind, and he will trust in God regardless. Now listen. Let us look at that word trust. You see, trust indicates a feeling of certainty that someone or something will not fail in any situation where protection, discretion, or fairness is essential. Now listen. Let us mention a couple more words. What about faith? What's the difference? Faith then is an intensification of trust, suggestion, and even deeper conviction of fidelity and integrity, often in spite of no evidence whatever, or even in the face of contrary evidence. Let me illustrate this for you. Now, there's a mother who has a son. And everyone talks about the son being worthless. But the mother's faith in her son, despite what is seen and heard, keeps her head, as we say, above waters. No one has trust but mama's trust. It doesn't matter what anyone says. And sometimes we could call this a blind faith, but only mama knows some things. All we have seen is the bad. But mama has seen some differences, and so she trusts. Now listen. And sometimes it's also in marriage, where everyone else sees the no, I'm going to invent a word, the no goodness of either husband or wife, but there is a blind faith. I don't care what you say about him or her. I believe in him or her. That's blind faith. But this word faith, it emphasizes a deep-seated conviction based on steadfast loyalty rather than demonstrable evidence. Hebrews 11:1. A simple, pious faith that remains unshakable in the face of every misfortune. But there are some other words like confidence and reliance. These more often suggest trust based on the proven reliability of someone or something. You see, confidence suggests a conviction born of time-tested familiarity. It also pertains specifically to a feeling that someone or something will not fail or behave differently than he has in the past. Reliance is even more specific than confidence, poured into an actual dependence on something else. Often it suggests the need for protection of the weak by the strong. Sometimes reliance indicates something that is resorted to as a solution to a specific problem. Now, we are mentioning these words to show who God is and that He is the only one in whom I can trust without reservation, because He's always there. Now, the word trust in its other forms is found about 188 times in the King James Version. That should give us an idea how powerful this word really is. So here's some questions for you this morning. After all that we have said, discussing the text, who do you trust? Because as we look around us today, trust is on the decline. No one trusts anyone anymore. We have become a highly skeptical society. Why is trust on the decline today? Why don't we hear more positive things about trust than we hear today? Why? Something is missing. You see, the first thing about this that we need to understand is we don't value truth. Last week we spent our time talking about truth. But the fact is we really do not value truth. But truth and trust go together. There's only one or two alphabetical letter of difference between the words truth and trust. You see, you trust those who tell you the truth, and you don't trust those who do not. Fair enough. If you buy into the line that there is no absolute truth, that means one thing: you can trust absolutely no one. But if you believe that there is absolute truth, then there is room for God in your life, and therefore room for something special. That you have to say, my life is not for Sister Glasgow. Neither should her life be for me. But because of our faith in God, we are able to trust. But she always has to keep in mind, and everyone have to keep in mind, that he or she, we're going to fail one another. When we fail one another, what should we do after that? But let's talk about what we should do before that, is trust in God. When we trust in God, we trust in His Word, and whatever His Word teaches us, that I trust and do. Even though I may feel differently, even though I am angry and frustrated, I must trust God for the result. Because I then have to ask, what would God have me to do before I make this decision? Listen. The lack of trust in today's world causes unbelievable problems. Listen, we are created to be a person of trust. You go back to the Garden of Eden. God created everything. Then He created man, and He put everything on a man's hands. And then He gave man a companion. What is man supposed to do? Trust God. God has made provision for him. God showed him how to work. God gave him a field. God showed him what beauty was. If he trusts God, he will find beauty in what God has made. Listen. When I trust God, And I find beauty in what God has made. When God transforms a person, I can find beauty in that person. But if that person has not yet been transformed by God, I can't find beauty because this person is not following God. So how can I form a relationship with someone who is not trusting in God? I put my trust in jeopardy when I follow and go after someone who does not trust in God. Do you understand? And what would be the inevitable end? You know it. Your faith will be questioned. Your faith will be put to the test. And sometimes you're going to come out losing. Because when you put your faith, intentionally put your faith to the test, you are right where the devil wants you to be. Do you understand? Listen, we're trying to build on what we started last week. When we talk about truth, it's like building a house, and the first room is trust. Trust in God is a very important part of a value system that leads to success. Again, look at Psalms 5 and verse 11. And we'll look at the three areas of trust I want us to study this morning. First of all, this I want us to see. The problems associated with trusting anyone more than God. There are some problems involved. Listen, if you don't trust God, you will create something or someone in whom you can trust. No. There's no empty vacuum somewhere. It's one or the other. You either trust in God or you're going to trust in something or God or someone. For example, you may trust in your bank account. You may trust in your own abilities. You may put your trust in your career. It just could be your hobby. Anything I trust more than God or anyone I value more than God has become an idol in my life. Listen. The second commandment tells us that we are not to make idols. There are only negative effects when we trust anything or anyone more than God. Listen, trusting anything more than God only leads to disappointment. It is hard enough, difficult enough to deal with us among ourselves. And then I'm going to go outside of God and put my trust in somebody? What am I looking for? Disappointment. It's going to come. It's going to come. Anytime you expect other people or things to meet a need in your life that only God can meet, you will end up being disappointed. And my friends, good things can become idols. Whether we believe it or not, it's still a fact. Marriage is good. But anytime you look at any single person or any single thing in life to meet all your needs, you are going to be let down. You're going to be let down. So what are we saying? Put your trust in God. As someone says, you trust in God, but come with cash. I don't trust anyone. You trust God, but you come with cash. Listen, when people are thinking of things that will make their life complete, they say things like, and I heard many of them, people come to my office and make all these statements. If I could just get married, I'm just tired being single. You better enjoy your single life. Because what you think is out there is not there. There are some good ones, but they're becoming scarcer and scarcer. So cherish. Don't rush off trying to find someone to meet that need. It's not going to be met. Or if I could just win this award, or if I could just have this job, I'll be happy. That's what you think. You're going to work with other folk. And you're going to have some bosses that don't like you. What are you going to do? If I could just make this amount of money, I'll be all right. Just ask someone who has made the money. Just ask, and they tell you if they're all right or not. But listen, whatever we trust becomes our God. Listen. Actually, whatever we trust more than God becomes our God, and that thing controls us. You hear me? So here's something for you to do. Make a list of the most important things in your life. Just put it through your mind. Maybe write this down sometime today or in the future. Make a list of the most important things in your life. Now, you're not going to be honest because I've told you some things already. So you're going to keep those things in your mind. But really, make a list of important things in your life. Whatever is first on that list controls your life. Now, you're going to tell me, God, and I'm going to ask you, is that true? Where is God on the first day of the week when you're supposed to be worshiping him? You're going to tell me, God, where is God when you decide to choose someone to be your mate forever? God is not there. So don't put God first. You know you'll be lying. Listen. Only God is wise enough to do all that we are talking about. We create idols because we want a God that we can control. And I'm sorry, that's not the God that is in heaven above. We reduce God down so we can control him. We do the stuff and then we tell God, that's what I want. We're not asking God for direction to make the choices, but when we make the choice on our own terms, then we want to say, God gonna bless me. You have the wrong idea of God. Your God is just too small to meet your needs. You need a God big enough that you can respect and honor and obey. A God big enough that you have seen he works. Even though times may be difficult, he still works. Listen, we decide where and when we want him. As one preacher put it, we don't want a God, we want a genie. See, we put him in that bottle and we wish. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be careful whom we trust. And we encourage you to trust God. There's more that we are going to say in the future, but we encourage you to call us, write us. We'll be glad to answer your questions when we talk about trust. So may God bless you today. And as always, we are happy to hear from you. Call us at 706-682-8106 or 706-662-9584. We are waiting for your call. May God bless you until we meet again next week. Please have a wonderful week. Now for the rest of us. Listen. trust in God, we have to ask some questions. Do I exist for God? Or does God exist for me? Take time to think. Don't answer yet, just write it down. Do I exist for God, or does God exist for me? God said, I'm going to make man in my image. Now we say, I'm going to make God in my image. You don't think so? Look again at the decisions you have made and tell me what you have done. Trusting false gods is nothing new. Man's attempt to create the kind of God he wants is nothing new. The Roman Empire did it. If you like to party and get drunk, you could worship a god called Bacchus. He is the god of drink. If you wanted to have sex with anyone you wanted, anytime you wanted, you could worship a god called Venus. Listen. If a god didn't fit, then you make up one that fits. Today, it is no different. We want a church that fits us. So we find one. There's so many just down the road. There's so many. You find one that fits you. You look for the people in the church that have businesses because you want a job. You look for the church that has some doctors so that you can have a discount when you go see your doctor. You find a church that fits. You want to worship that satisfies your fleshly desires, so you don't have to go to the juke joint on Friday night. You come to church on Sunday morning and you show your stuff. You want a church that fits, not a church and a worship that's according to the Bible. Because you're going to say sometimes, we are just too dead. You come dead and you leave dead because your heart is not in it. You're looking for something that can satisfy your fleshly desires. I'm not saying that we can't improve. We must improve day after day. That's not the point. The point is you want someone or something to satisfy your desires. We want music that reminds us of the world we came out. So we go to a place where there is a band up here and a band over there that you can stomp your feet and have a good time. So you don't have to go Friday night to the juke joint. Right? You get your stuff on Sunday morning. Why should you want to go? See, like you, I look at YouTube sometimes and I see all the religious stuff and see how folks are marching down the aisle, dancing, shaking their behinds, and the men just looking on. So you find that in some of these churches, the men don't go because they love the Lord. They go to see the women shake. You know what I'm talking about. We have to get down to it, what is real in our society from what God really wants. Listen. The reasons we find it difficult to trust God is very simple. Look at it. Look at one. The reason why we find it difficult to trust God is because we don't know God. We have been talking about this on Wednesday nights. We don't know God. So here are some questions that we would like to answer if time will permit us. So if you don't mind, you can write these questions down. There are 6 of them, or 6 thoughts, 6 points. Number 1, do I value my kinship with God? That's number 1. Do I value my kinship with God? Number 2, do I feel honored and humbled that I am God's chief concern? That's Psalms 8. What is man that thou art mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you visit him. Thou hast made him lower than the angels, but crowned him with glory and power. Question number 3. How often do I think of God? How often do I think of God? Number 4. Do I worship God, or do I merely subscribe to a form because I regard it as my duty? I know that's a long question, but you get the idea. Again, let me repeat those two. How often do I think of God? You remember the song that we sing, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. Do I worship God, or do I merely subscribe to a form because I regard it as my duty? Number 5 is just a thought. Read carefully the 46th Psalm and compare David's attitude toward God with your own. Remember how he begins? God is my refuge and strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. And then number 6, discuss the intense sensation of thirst, Psalms 42. Why was the figure of thirst so often used in the scriptures? As the psalmist says, it's like a deer that runs blindly to find a water hole. He sees nothing else. He just runs. And sometimes he runs, even though you are driving, he runs into you because he's seeking water. The soul thirsteth or longs after God, the psalmist is saying, like a deer that runs after water. Christianity is a spiritual religion. Attitudes are of the greatest importance, hence the necessity of studying about God himself as well as learning his will. But as we discussed Wednesday night, mere academic knowledge of God is not enough. We know of God. We read about God. But do we really know God? Do we? Everyone needs to be impressed with his personal relation to the personal God. What's yours? Tell me, are you impressed with God and your knowledge of God and your relationship with God? Can you say with assurance that God is mine and I am his, that in God I trust more than anyone else, and it doesn't matter what happens around me, though difficult, God is still my God. He never fails me. He never disappoints me. You remember what is said in John chapter 6, verses 44 and 45? They shall all be taught of God. Everyone that comes to God must know God. Under the old system, a person was physically and literally born into relationship with God, then he was taught. Under Christ, one is taught first, then is born again. One must be taught of God. It is unfortunate, though not our fault, that some people come to God and don't know who he is. They come out of emotions rather than out of knowledge, rather than thinking how they had been in the past. You know, sometimes in life, all of us have to come to a point where we say, you know what? I've not always done my best. I wish I have another chance to start over. And we do. But when that opportunity comes, we usually let it pass. because we are not as honest as we think we are. We don't want others to know that I messed up, that I failed. Every one of us has failed somewhere along the way. And thank God for second chances. You remember Jonah? God gave him another chance. And he would say that deep down in the belly of hell, he learned to trust God. He ran from God. We are so much like him sometimes, so much like him. And then when we see where we are, what we are doing, we run to God. And then when we see how God is blessing us, then we start running ahead of God. You remember him? After he had been delivered and he had been vomited up on the shore, he went to Nineveh and he preached, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And then he went on a hill and sat down and waited for Nineveh to be destroyed. And while he waited, the sun began to come down on his head, and God sent a tree to give him shade. And he didn't even take the time to think about that shade. He just enjoyed the shade without thinking of the source of that shade, and waited for God to destroy Nineveh. And when God didn't destroy Nineveh, he said, that's the reason why I ran in the first place. Because I know that you will not destroy them. He was so full of hate and prejudice. He wanted Nineveh to be destroyed. He did not want God to forgive them. Here is the greatest, one of the greatest preachers with the greatest success, and didn't appreciate it. Have you noticed with us sometimes, after we have spent 40, 60, 70 years in sin, and God has forgiven us and we come to Christ, the next person we meet, we want him to go to hell if he doesn't change immediately. We forget, and how soon we forget where we came from and how long it took us to change our lives. As soon as we meet someone, we begin to say, you know, you ought to change. Look at how God blessed you. The person has never thought of that before. Give him a chance to think. Don't give up. Pray. Encourage. Don't condemn. The person is already under condemnation in his or her failure to obey God. Now it's our job to help bring that person to Jesus. It's going to take some patience. And listen, it's going to take our trust in God. Our trust in God. So they all shall be taught of God. God teaches concerning himself. God teaches about all there is to know. Finally, in John chapter 17 and verse 3, Jesus Christ in his prayer, he said, this is life eternal, that they should know thee the only true God, and him whom thou didst send, even Jesus Christ. I'm going to make one statement that I'm going to begin with in the next hour. God does not exist merely to point us to the Bible, but the Bible exists to lead us to the Father and to the Son. Let us know God through his word. You are here this morning and you're not yet a Christian. God loves you. God cares about you. God gave his son for you and for me. Do you believe that? Do you believe God at all? Are you willing to change your life in repentance? It's time to say, I want to quit that life that I was living. Now it's time to give it to God. Acknowledge who Jesus Christ is, the Son of God, and be baptized to wash away your sins. The water is ready. And for Christians, the brothers are ready to pray for you, to encourage you to come back to Christ if you're falling away. Why don't you come as together we stand and sing?
I heard an old story, how a Savior came from glory, how he gave his life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard about his groaning, of his precious blood's atoning. Then I repented of my sins and won the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and he bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is due him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood.